Why would a country that claims to only want peaceful nuclear energy, why would such a country build hidden underground enrichment facilities? Why would a country with vast natural energy reserves invest billions in developing nuclear energy? Why would a country intent on merely civilian nuclear programs continue to defy multiple Security Council resolutions and incur the tremendous cost of crippling sanctions on its economy? And why would a country with a peaceful nuclear program develop intercontinental ballistic missiles whose sole purpose is to deliver nuclear warheads?
The Philadelphia Church of God presents the Trumpet Daily.
Every good tree brings forth good fruit, and every corrupt tree brings forth evil fruit. That's what Jesus taught us in the Gospels, and that's why he continued on from that, saying, "You shall know them by their fruits." We're to judge according to fruits, and yet when it comes to world leaders, even some of the most violent and the most dangerous among us, Western diplomats and ambassadors of peace, they don't often judge by fruits. They judge by words, smooth-sounding words, soft-spoken words. Now consider the way the world reaches out to Iran in particular here in these last few months, now that they've gotten the new president, the supposed moderate, and you see the United States leading the way, reaching out to this leader, and you see an international press in the West that's very impressed with this new man, this new leader, and they consider him to be a moderate. They much prefer him over the previous leader in Iran, even though these presidents, of course, are just kind of puppets on a string, as everyone knows. A while back, Rouhani, the new president, he referred to the human tragedy in Syria, and yet Iran, of course, is one of the biggest supporters of that Syrian regime that's committing all of those atrocities. Rouhani's also condemned the violent scourge of terrorism, as he called it, and yet Iran is the #1 state sponsor of terror. And so he's out there talking about how we've got to eliminate terrorism, and there they are, backing terrorism, funding terrorism, supporting terrorism. He's criticized, quote, attempts to change the regional balance through proxies, which is, that's one of Iran's biggest strategies in terms of foreign policy. It's to upset the balance in the world using its proxies in Lebanon and Gaza and elsewhere. They've got their tentacles all over the world. As Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, asked on October 1st when he gave his speech at the UN, he said, "Why would a country that claims to only want peaceful nuclear energy build hidden underground enrichment facilities?" Good question. Why would a country with vast natural energy reserves invest billions in developing nuclear energy? He said, why would a country with a peaceful nuclear program develop intercontinental ballistic missiles whose sole purpose is to deliver nuclear warheads? These are all good questions, and the answers, one would think, are obvious, but not so for the peacemakers of our time, who are quite happy to get a smooth-sounding phrase or two and hope then that there will be peace. Back in May, this Iranian leader had an interview with an Iranian TV station. This is about 3 weeks before he became president. And during the interview, it was kind of tense because the interviewer accused him, while he was over the nuclear program in Iran, he accused him of suspending the program back in 2003, 2004, and 2005. And Rouhani was clearly agitated by the exchange. And this is how the Times of Israel reported the story back in October. It says, smiling but evidently highly irritated by the suggestion, Rouhani called it a lie that only the illiterate would believe and said that whoever's talking to you in your earpiece was feeding false information. And he proceeded, the Times says, to detail how Iran, in fact, had flagrantly breached the October 2003 Tehran Declaration, which he said was supposed to outline how everything should be suspended. In other words, they had this agreement in 2003. They agreed on paper to suspend their nuclear weapons activities. And yet, as he said in the interview, just this year, just back in May, just weeks before he became president, we didn't abide by that. We didn't follow through in our pledge. We continued right on with our program. We certainly didn't do what we said we would. That's what he admitted on TV. Now, at the UN General Assembly summit back in September, you probably heard a lot about the United States, President Obama reaching out to Rouhani, the moderate. Before the conference, the White House had indicated that the president wanted a photo op with Rouhani. And guess who turned that down? It was Iran. They said, no, we don't want that. We don't want that. But the president persisted and said that he'd be open to taking a personal call from Rouhani while he was in New York. Never happened. Rouhani didn't want to call him. And then the conference came to an end. Rouhani's on his way to the airport, and guess who calls him while he's en route to the airport? It was the President of the United States who persistently went after him, trying to reach out to him, trying to talk to him. And this was the conversation. It lasted about 15 minutes. That was reported all over the news as a huge breakthrough in relations between the U.S. and Iran. First time in 30 years, 3 decades, that leaders from these two countries have spoken. And yet, just a little bit of the background about how that conversation came about highlights just how disgraceful it really was for the United States. I mean, what a disgraceful display of weakness on the part of America. Let's look at 2 Timothy 4. 2 Timothy 4, one Washington Post writer said that President Obama's phone call to Rouhani revealed an undisguised desperation for a deal. I mean, if you remember that time period, America had just been manhandled by Putin in Russia over the Syria debacle. And then the president turns his attention to Iran, hoping for some kind of breakthrough there, and yet it turned out to be another disaster in so many ways. 2 Timothy chapter 4, in the recent Trumpet magazine, my father referred to that phone call as the most shameful phone call ever made by a U.S. president. It wasn't a good thing. It wasn't good for the power and prestige of the United States. 2 Timothy 4 here in verse 3, it says, "For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lusts shall they heap to themselves teachers, having itching ears." The last part of that verse just means that we're living in a time when people wish to hear smooth things that just sort of tickle the ears, that sound good, that sound nice. And so it doesn't really matter that Iran sponsors all of these international terrorist activities. It doesn't really matter that they're preparing actively to wipe Israel off the map. Those things don't really matter. Those fruits aren't really taken into account, because when a so-called moderate comes on the scene, then Western leaders, the United States in particular, are going to reach out, are going to go after those smooth words. And really, our failure to confront that diabolical evil abroad, it reveals a lot about the evil that we have here at home. It certainly does. Verse 4, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned unto fables. They'll turn away from what the Bible says, the truth of God, God's warnings. Read Ezekiel 33 sometime about God's watchmen and see how his message is ignored and rejected by so many. We turn away from the Bible, and yet we won't even learn from history either. I mean, a lesson from fairly modern history, just from the 1930s and 40s. If we go back to that, it could teach us quite a lot. Before World War II, there were plenty of ambassadors that were reaching out to Adolf Hitler, just like President Obama has been reaching out to Iran. Plenty of ambassadors back then. Really, there was only one leader who stood up to the tyrant, and that was Winston Churchill. But he was a lone voice crying in the wilderness. He was an outcast during the 1930s. His message was not well received, even as Hitler was building up his empire. As Germany was doing that, Britain was working to disarm. That's what the foreign secretary in Britain was feverishly working to do, to dismantle, to take down Britain's military might. And he had a lot of support, the foreign secretary, in the British government and even among the people. How could so many leaders in Britain back in the 1930s, almost all of them in Parliament, how could so many of them convince themselves that the way to handle this explosive situation is to reach out and to talk to Hitler and to simultaneously dismantle our arsenal? How could they think that? A lot of them did. In September of 1938, Neville Chamberlain, remember him? He went to Munich, reached an agreement with Hitler, and it pretty much was a sellout even on paper because they gave up the Sudetenland. He just gave up. A British leader gave up part of Czechoslovakia to Germany on the condition that Germany would stop going after more territory. And Hitler said, well, sure, yeah, absolutely. You give me that chunk and then I'll back off. And remember, Chamberlain came back, he waved the piece of paper, and there were throngs of people cheering peace in our time. And you know what Chamberlain said after that? He said, in 3 months, all of this will go away. In 3 months, all of this will be over. And in a matter of months, 6 months in fact, Hitler blatantly violated the agreement. And about 6 years later, he had wiped out 1/3 of the Jewish race on earth. He had annihilated 1/3 of the Jewish race, which he had vowed to do. He promised to do that. Well, that's the way it was, and confronting him in the 1930s, if you can even call it confronting, it was a policy of appeasement, and it wasn't any better over here in America. I mean, we may well have stayed out of the fight altogether had it not been for Pearl Harbor. As Edward Murrow said about that attack, America didn't enter the war, we were bombed into it. Let me quote to you what Martin Gilbert wrote in his biography about Churchill. He said, into Europe's highly complicated and electrical situations, Churchill declared, so he's quoting Churchill here, Churchill says, our well-meaning but thoughtless and reckless pacifists expect us to plunge into sweeping gestures encouraged by long-distance halloos from the United States, smooth-sounding words, pats on the back from the U.S., encouraged by all these pious platitudes. In many ways, the United States was more pacifist than Britain, and yet you don't see leaders in either country today who are embarrassed by this shameful display. You don't see them in either country today who've really learned lessons from that and who hearken back to it frequently. Even Churchill's fallen out of favor with so many leaders in Britain today. They didn't like him then, they don't like him now. Even as a historical figure. He was a warmonger. Isaiah 30, let's look at a couple of verses over here that tie right in with 2 Timothy 4, Isaiah chapter 30. You've heard it said before that those who fail to learn from history are destined to repeat it. And so what will happen today if a Hitler-type movement gains momentum and develops the arsenal that it needs to go on a vengeful display of destruction? The Bible speaks of abominable acts like this, causing desolation and widespread destruction. What will happen? Can we really afford, when you think of the power of weapons today as compared to the 1940s, can we really afford a pacifist attitude? In these latter days, Isaiah 30 and verse 9, it says that this is a rebellious people, lying children, children that will not hear the law of the Lord, which say to the seers or the prophets, see not, and to the prophets, prophesy not unto us right things, speak unto us smooth things. Prophesy deceits. That's what the people wanted back then, and it's what we want today. And so Rouhani comes along and gives us smooth-sounding deceits, and people lap it up. People just love it. They want it. Churchill wrote back in 1932, this was in a newspaper column, he said, "Don't delude yourselves. Do not let His Majesty's government believe. I am sure they do believe that all that Germany is asking for is equal status. I believe the refined term now is equal qualitative status by indefinitely deferred stages." He says, that is not what Germany is seeking. All these bands of sturdy Teutonic youths marching through the streets and roads of Germany with the light of desire in the eyes to suffer for their fatherland are not looking for status. They're looking for weapons. They're looking for weapons. And when they have the weapons, believe me, they will then ask for the return of lost territories and lost colonies. And when that demand is made, it cannot fail to shake and possibly shatter to their foundations every one of the countries I have mentioned and some other countries I have not mentioned. That was in 1932, 7, 8 years before Hitler really started with the rampage. But yet it was building all through the 30s. And even as late as September of 1938, as I said, a British prime minister comes back to the homeland waving a piece of paper, assuring Lord Halifax that in 3 months all of this will blow over. Churchill said, the dangers were too acute to be hidden behind bland platitudes. He said, I cannot recall at any time when the gap between kind of words which statesmen use and what was actually happening to many countries was so great as it is now. He says, finally, the habit of saying smooth things and uttering pious platitudes and sentiments to gain applause without reason to the underlying facts is more pronounced now than it has ever been in my experience. It makes you wonder what he would say today if he were alive. Because, you know, there were plenty of people back then who were urging him to reach out to Hitler, to stop with all of the strong talk, Just give him a phone call. Call him up. Talk to him. And had he done something like that, what would he have heard? Smooth sounding words. After his recent call with Rouhani, President Obama said, "I do believe that there is a basis for a resolution because Iran's supreme leader has issued a fatwa against the development of the nuclear weapons." He believes there's a basis for an agreement to be reached here because the supreme leader of Iran said that he's not going to build nuclear weapons. That's placing a tremendous amount of faith in smooth things and, as Churchill said, pious platitudes. And it comes at a time, students, when, as Jesus said, we're right near the brink of great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. Nothing like it is what's coming. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Only in a nuclear age could a prophecy like that from Jesus Christ be fulfilled. And that's the age in which we live. And more nations are about to get nuclear weapons. As Churchill warned, I'll close with this. He said, "Mankind has never been in this position before. Without having improved appreciably in virtue or enjoying wiser guidance, it has got into its hands for the first time the tools by which it can unfailingly accomplish its own extermination." He says that is the point in human destinies to which all the glories and toils of men have at last led them. He said they would do well to pause and ponder upon their new responsibilities. We would do well, in other words, to understand what's at stake and to learn the lessons from history